The first time Tony saw Mimi, she was arguing with a stubborn customer over the price of a catfish while holding 3 other fish in one hand like it weighed nothing. The market was loud, crowded, and restless, the kind of place where people spoke over each other and time moved quickly. But Mimi stood out without trying. Her voice wasn't the loudest, her stall wasn't the biggest, and her clothes were simple, yet there was something steady about her. She didn't beg customers to buy, she didn't complain, she just worked. Tony had only come to the market that morning to escape a meeting he didn't want to attend. His driver had looked confused when he asked to stop near the fish section, but Tony insisted. Standing there in plain clothes, watching the life of the market unfold, he felt strangely invisible and peaceful. "Last price," the customer insisted. Mimi shook her head. "If I sell it at that price, I won't even replace it tomorrow." "You sellers always say that." Mimi calmly placed the fish back on the table. "Then don't buy it." The man stared at her, surprised by her confidence. After a moment, he sighed, paid the full price, and left with the fish. Tony smiled to himself. Then he stepped forward. "How much for this one?" he asked, pointing at a tilapia. Mimi looked up briefly, then named the price. Tony paid without arguing. That surprised her. "You didn't bargain," she said. "I didn't need to," Tony replied. She wrapped the fish in newspaper and handed it to him. "You must not come to market often." "I'm learning," he said. That was all. Tony left. But the next day, he returned, and the day after. At first, Mimi didn't think much about it. Regular customers existed everywhere. Still, she noticed he always arrived early, before the sun grew hot and before the markets became chaotic. One morning, she finally asked, "You really like fish that much?" Tony smiled. "Not really." "Then why are you always here?" "I like the market." Mimi gave him a look that said she didn't fully believe him. The truth was, Tony liked how nobody cared who he was there. No business calls, no expectations, no one asking for favors. Just the sound of traders, the smell of salt water, and Mimi carefully arranging fish like it was an art. Days passed and their conversations became easier. Tony learned that Mimi had been selling fish since she was a teenager. Her mother had died years earlier, and Mimi had taken over the responsibility of helping her family survive. Her father's health was fragile, and her younger brother was still in school. "Do you ever rest?" Tony asked one morning. "When the day rests," Mimi answered. Tony laughed. "That's not rest." "It's enough," she said. Another day, Tony arrived to find Mimi struggling to lift a heavy cooler. Without asking, he rushed forward. "Wait!" He lifted it easily and placed it beside the store. "Thank you," Mimi said. "You carry this every day?" She nodded. Tony shook his head in disbelief. "You're stronger than you look." "No, I just don't have a choice." That sentence stayed in Tony's mind long after he left. Weeks went by, and the market sellers began to recognize Tony. Some assumed he was new in town, others thought he worked nearby. Nobody guessed the truth. Tony liked it that way. One morning, he didn't come. Mimi noticed. She told herself it didn't matter. Customers came and went. But when the next morning passed without him again, the market felt slightly different, quieter, even though it wasn't. On the third day, a sleek black car appeared near the market entrance. People turned to look. Cars like that didn't belong there. The door opened, and Tony stepped out. He wore a fitted suit, clean shoes, a wristwatch that caught the sunlight. Mimi froze. He walked toward her store like nothing had changed. "Good morning, Mimi." "You're not an office worker," she said immediately. Tony exhaled slowly. "No." "Who are you?" "My name is still Tony. That part didn't change. Mimi crossed her arms. I own a business logistics company and a few other businesses. You are rich, Mimi said plainly. Tony hesitated. Yes. Why come here and pretend? I didn't pretend. I just didn't introduce myself with money. Mimi looked away, unsure what to feel. Tony continued carefully. Do you know how people behave when they know you have money? She didn't answer. They stop being real, he said. But you never changed. Because I didn't know, Mimi replied. Exactly. The market noise slowly returned around them. After a long silence, Mimi handed him a fish. Pay like normal. Tony smiled with relief. Their friendship continued, but now the market sellers whispered when Tony visited. Mimi ignored them. One evening, Tony asked, What's your biggest dream? Mimi kept arranging fish. Dreams are expensive. Tell me anyway, she sighed. A proper seafood shop, freezer storage, no rushing to sell everything in one day. Tony nodded. Days later, Mimi's fish supply went bad after a power outage at the storage facility she rented space from. She lost nearly all her earnings that week. She didn't complain. She just worked harder. Tony noticed. The following week, a small shop near the harbor became available for rent. Mimi had seen it before, but never dared to ask the price. Then, Tony showed up with keys. I want to invest in your business, he said. Mimi stepped back. No. It's not charity. No. It's a partnership. No. Tony paused. Why? Because I don't want to depend on someone else's money. Tony nodded slowly. I understand. And he didn't bring it up again. But 2 months later, Tony returned with a different idea. Not money, equipment suppliers, affordable storage contacts, a reliable fisherman willing to sell directly to Mimi. No ownership, no contracts, just connections. This is help, not control. Mimi accepted. Her business slowly grew. Customers followed her from the market to a small rented stall near the water. Her father sometimes sat outside, greeting people. Her younger brother helped after school. One evening, as the sun reflected across the harbor, Tony visited the stall. You built this, he said. Mimi headed his head. I worked for it. Tony smiled. That's what I meant. Mimi handed him a fish. You still don't know how to cook, right? Tony laughed, still learning. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air smelled like the sea, just like the first day they met. You know, Mimi, said Mimi quietly, I used to feel invisible. Tony looked. Now? Asked he. Mimi smiled. Now I feel seen. Tony nodded, because that was why he kept coming back to the market in the first place, to feel the same thing. And somehow, between fish scales, early mornings, and honest conversations, two people from completely different worlds had found something real. Not because of money, not because of luck, but because they met as ordinary people first.